The patrol ship dragged the wreck into the docking bay like a dead animal pulled from a river. It was a small human vessel, barely held together by its own frame, with burn marks running down the hull and a crack through the cockpit glass wide enough to fit a hand through. Nobody on the medical station Pale Reach had expected anything interesting that morning. They were wrong. Velith was the first to reach the biopod. She stood nearly 8 feet tall, her thin insectoid body clicking softly as she walked, her forearms already pulling on surgical wraps. She had been chief medical officer of Pale Reach for 11 years and had treated over 200 species. She had seen bodies crushed by gravity wells, melted by acid rain, and frozen in the vacuum of space. She was not easy to surprise, but when the pod opened and she saw the man inside, she stopped. He was human. That much was clear from the shape of him. 2 arms, 2 legs, a soft face with closed eyes. He wore the torn remains of a gray jumpsuit, and his boots were held together with wire. But his body told a story that Velith could not read. Burns covered his back and shoulders, layered one on top of another, as if he had been set on fire more than once. His ribs had been broken and healed so many times that the bone had thickened into ridges beneath his skin. His hands were rough and cracked, the knuckles swollen and white with scar tissue. There were cuts along his arms that had closed without stitches, the skin pulling itself together in uneven lines. Velith leaned closer. She had seen injured humans before. They were fragile creatures. Thin skin, weak bones, slow healing. The Union medical files described them as a minor species from a small world on the edge of explored space. They were not known for anything remarkable. But this man's body did not match those files at all. She activated the scanner above the surgical table and passed it over him from head to feet. The machine hummed, blinked, and then returned an error. She ran it again. Another error. On the 3rd attempt, partial results came through, and each one made less sense than the last. His bone density was nearly 3 times higher than the human average. His cellular regeneration was fast, far faster than it should have been, but uneven. Some wounds had healed at an extraordinary rate. Others had scarred badly, as though something had slowed the healing on purpose. His muscle fibers were thicker and more tightly packed than anything in the human medical profile. Norath came rushing in, his gelatinous blue body wobbling with every step. He was Velith's junior medic, a young Droon who had only been on the station for 6 months. He looked at the man on the table, and his wide, dark eyes grew wider. "What species is he?" Norath asked. "Human," Velith said, supposedly. She instructed Norath to run a full species match through the Union database. He hurried to the console and entered the genetic sample. The system processed it for a long moment and then returned a result. Species: human, Homo sapiens. File reference: HU7701. But the file was thin. A few pages of basic anatomy, a short entry on their home planet, and a note at the bottom that read, "Low priority. Pre-expansion civilization. Limited contact recommended." Norath scrolled through the file and frowned. There were restricted access markers on several sections, locked behind clearance levels that neither he nor Velith had. He told her this, and she made a sound with her mandibles that meant she was annoyed. "Get me the human liaison," she said. Do-hyun arrived 20 minutes later. He was a broad man in his 40s, with short gray hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from tired stone. He had served in Earth's military for 15 years before retiring and taking a position as a cultural liaison with the Galactic Union. His job was simple. Whenever a human turned up in Union space, he was called in to translate, explain, and smooth things over. It did not happen often. Most humans stayed close to their own territory. He walked into the medbay, looked at the man on the table, and his expression changed. It was not shock. It was recognition, not of the man himself, but of what had been done to him. Do-hyun had seen burns like those before. He had seen bones that healed too thick, and skin that pulled itself together without help. He had seen it in classified files that he was never supposed to have read, in reports about a program that officially did not exist. He said nothing about this to Velith. Instead, he asked simple questions. Where was the ship found? What was its registration? Were there any other passengers? Velith answered them all. The ship had been drifting in an uncharted corridor near the outer rim. It was registered under a salvage license to a man named Taeho. No other passengers, no cargo, just a man and a broken ship. Do-hyun looked at Taeho for a long time. Then he said, "When he wakes up, I need to speak with him alone." Velith did not like this. Her patients were her responsibility, and she did not enjoy being pushed aside. But something in Do-hyun's voice made her agree. There was a weight in it, the kind that came from knowing something terrible and carrying it for too long. The hours passed. Taeho did not wake, but he did not worsen either. His body seemed to hover in a strange place between dying and recovering, as if it could not decide which direction to go. Norath monitored his vitals from the console, recording every number and logging every anomaly. It was near the end of the night cycle when Norath noticed it. He had been watching the heart monitor, a steady green line pulsing with the rhythm of Taeho's heartbeat. Normal, stable. And then, beneath it, a second line appeared. It was faint, almost invisible against the background noise of the machine, but it was there. A second pulse, a second rhythm, slower than the first, deeper like a drum buried underground. Norath ran the scan again. The result was the same. 2 heartbeats. He called Velith immediately. She came to the console, looked at the readout, and stood very still. In all her years of medicine, she had never seen anything like this. Humans had one heart. Every file, every scan, every autopsy she had ever reviewed confirmed this. One heart, 4 chambers, centrally located in the chest. It was one of the most basic facts in the human medical profile. But the machine was not lying. Somewhere inside this man, a second pulse was beating. Velith looked at Taeho, lying motionless on the table, with his scarred arms resting at his sides, and his burned back pressed against the cold surface of the bed. He looked like a man who had been through a war that nobody else remembered. And now his body was doing something that should not have been possible. She pulled up his file again and stared at the words on the screen. Low priority. Limited contact recommended. She almost laughed. Whatever this man was, whatever had been done to him, there was nothing low priority about it. She closed the file and opened a new one. She typed his name at the top and began recording everything from the beginning. She had a feeling she was going to need very detailed notes. In the pod bay below, Taeho's wrecked ship sat cooling in the dim light. Somewhere, inside its cracked cockpit, a small screen still flickered. On it, repeating in a loop that had been running for what might have been months or years, was a single line of text. It read, "Do not forget what they did to us." Taeho opened his eyes on the second day. He did not gasp or struggle or panic the way most patients did when they woke in an unfamiliar place. He simply opened his eyes, looked at the ceiling, and then slowly turned his head to take in the room around him. The alien medical equipment, the soft blue light, the faint hum of air recyclers working to keep the atmosphere balanced for multiple species. He studied all of it with the calm, careful attention of a man who had woken up in strange places many times before. Velith was at his side within minutes. She introduced herself, explained where he was, and told him that he had been found drifting in a wrecked ship near the outer rim. Taeho listened without interrupting. When she finished, he nodded once and said, "Thank you for pulling me in." His voice was quiet and steady. What surprised Velith was the language. He spoke Union Common, the shared tongue of the Galactic Union. Most humans she had encountered could barely manage the basic trade version. This man spoke it as if he had grown up with it. She asked him his name. He told her. She asked about his ship. He gave the registration number. She asked about his injuries. He said, "They are old, and nothing more." She asked about the second heartbeat. His expression did not change, but something behind his eyes shifted, a small door closing. "I cannot explain that," he said, and then he looked away. Do-hyun came to see him that afternoon. Velith allowed them privacy, though she kept the medical monitors running from the next room. Do-hyun pulled a chair beside the bed and sat down heavily. For a while, neither man spoke. Then Do-hyun said, "I have read the Ember files." Tae-ho looked at him. His face remained still, but his hands tightened on the edge of the blanket. "Those files do not exist," he said. "That is what they told us." "They exist," Do-hyun said. "I read them 7 years ago, when I still had military clearance. They were buried deep, but they were there. I know what Project Ember was. I know what they did to the colonists." Tae-ho was silent for a long time. The monitor beside him beeped softly, tracking the steady rhythm of his first heartbeat and the slower, deeper rhythm of the second. Finally, he spoke. "Ember did not adapt us," he said. His voice was flat, like a man reading words off a wall. "It broke us and waited to see what grew back." He told Do-hyun the short version. There had been a program, run by a division of Earth's Colonial Bureau that did not appear on any public record. The program identified colonists who were being sent to the most dangerous worlds, planets with toxic air, crushing gravity, extreme temperatures, and conditions that no normal human could survive for long. Before departure, these colonists were given what they were told were routine vaccinations and health supplements. They were not told that the injections contained gene-editing agents designed to activate sequences in their DNA that had been dormant for tens of thousands of years. Sequences from an older time, when humans were not yet the soft, comfortable species they had become. The scientists behind Ember believed that somewhere inside the human genome was a blueprint for something tougher. Something that could survive anything. They were right. But they had no idea what they were waking up. On Voron 4, the colony world where Tae-ho had been sent, the changes began within weeks of arrival. The planet was a nightmare. The atmosphere was thin and laced with chemicals that burned the lungs. The gravity was 30% higher than Earth's standard. The soil was barren, and the local wildlife was fast, armored, and hostile. The supply ships that were supposed to return every 3 months never came back after the first drop. The colonists began to change. Not all at once, and not all in the same way. Some of them grew denser. Their bones thickened. Their skin became harder. Their lungs learned to filter what they could not before. Others changed in stranger ways. Their eyes adjusted to the constant low light. Their reflexes sharpened until they could react to threats before they were fully aware of them. The pain did not stop, though. Every change hurt. It was like the body was tearing itself apart and rebuilding from the inside, and the process had no mercy. Not everyone survived the changes. Tae-ho's voice dropped when he said this. He told Do-hyun about a man named Jisuk, who had been a mechanic back on Earth, and had volunteered for the colony because he wanted a better life for his daughter. Jisuk's body rejected the transformation. His bones grew too fast and began pressing against his organs. He died over the course of 3 days, and there was nothing anyone could do for him except hold his hand and lie to him about how it would be okay. There had been 26 colonists on Voron 4. By the end of the first year, 14 were dead. By the end of the second year, only 9 remained. Among them was Yuna. Tae-ho did not say much about Yuna. He said she was part of the crew. He said she was the one who kept them going when the rest of them wanted to stop. He said she had a way of looking at a terrible situation and finding the one small thing in it that was still worth fighting for. And then he stopped talking about her, and Do-hun did not push. While Tae-ho and Do-hun spoke, Hana arrived at Pale Reach. She was a xenobiologist, a human woman in her mid-30s, with sharp eyes and a habit of chewing the end of her stylus when she was thinking. She had been working in another wing of the station, studying the immune systems of a newly contacted species, when Velith's report on Tae-ho's anomalous biology had reached her inbox. She had read it twice, and then she had packed her equipment and come immediately. Hana ran her own scans on Tae-ho while he slept that evening. She was more thorough than Velith had been, not because Velith was careless, but because Hana knew what to look for. She had spent years studying human genetics, and she knew that the human genome was full of doors that had been closed for millennia. Old code, ancient instructions, written by evolution, and then locked away when they were no longer needed. What she found in Tae-ho's DNA made her sit down. The gene editing was crude. It had been done with a heavy hand, more like forcing a lock than picking it. But it had worked. Sequences that should have been dormant were wide awake. Genes associated with extreme environmental adaptation, heightened pain tolerance, accelerated tissue repair, and increased oxygen efficiency were all active and functioning. These were not new genes. They were old, very old. And according to every genetic database Hana had access to, they had last been active in a branch of the human family tree that had disappeared over 40,000 years ago. She pulled up the reference files. There, in the deep archives of human evolutionary biology, was a classification that most scientists treated as a footnote. Homo sapiens adaptica, a theoretical subspecies proposed based on scattered fossil evidence and unusual genetic markers found in certain ancient remains. The theory suggested that at some point in human prehistory, a small population of humans had developed an extraordinary ability to physically adapt to hostile environments within a single generation. They had not survived, or at least, that was what everyone believed. The subspecies had been classified as extinct long before recorded history. But here, lying in a bed on an alien space station at the edge of known space, was a man whose body carried those same markers. Not as fossils, not as theory, as living, functioning biology. Hana brought her findings to Velith. She was still explaining when the station's diagnostic AI, a system known as the Arbiter, interrupted. Its cold, precise voice filled the room. Alert. Subject genetic markers are consistent with species file HU7709. Classification: extinct. Subspecies designation: Homo sapiens adaptica. Last recorded active specimens, pre-expansion era, approximately 40,000 standard years ago. Current status: no living specimens on record. Formal reclassification review has been initiated. Velith turned slowly toward Hana, her compound eyes reflecting the blue light of the screen. "Your kind," Velith said carefully. "We're supposed to be simple." Hana stared at the data still scrolling across the display. 40,000 years of silence, and now this. A man who should not exist, carrying the proof of something that humanity itself had forgotten. She looked back at Velith. "We were never simple," she said. "You just were not paying attention." The Arbiter's alert traveled fast. Within hours of its transmission, the message had reached 3 Union oversight stations, 2 diplomatic relay posts, and the office of the Galactic Union's Bureau of Species Preservation. By the following morning, Pale Reach was no longer a quiet medical station on the edge of nowhere. It was the center of something much larger. Velith received the first official communication before she had finished her morning review of Tae-ho's vitals. It came from the Bureau, stamped with the highest priority marker she had ever seen on a medical case. The message was polite, but firm. A diplomatic envoy was being dispatched to Pale Reach. The subject designated as Tae-ho was to be held in medical custody until the envoy arrived. His status had been changed from patient to protected specimen under Article 9 of the Union's Extinct Species Preservation Protocol. No transfer, no discharge, and no external communication regarding the subject would be permitted without Bureau authorization. Velith read the message twice. Then she read it a third time, paying close attention to the word specimen. She did not like it. She went to Teho's room and told him. He was sitting up in bed, his scarred hands resting on his knees, looking out the small viewport at the dying brown dwarf that Pale Reach orbited. When she finished, he let out a short breath that might have been a laugh. Specimen, he repeated. That is a new one. On Vorin 4 they called us subjects. Before that, we were volunteers. Before that, we were colonists. He turned to look at her. They always have a word for us. It is never the right one. Do-hyun was furious when he heard. He stormed into Velith's office, his face red, his voice tight. He told her that reclassifying a living person as a specimen was a violation of Union ethical codes that the Bureau itself had helped write. Velith agreed with him, but she also told him that the Bureau had the legal authority to do it, and that arguing with them from a medical station with no political weight was not going to change anything quickly. Then we need to change it slowly, Do-hyun said, and we need evidence. This was where Hana came in. She had not slept. Since finding the dormant gene activations in Teho's DNA, she had been working through the night, using Do-hyun's liaison credentials to access restricted files in the Earth Origin archives. What she found was worse than she had expected. Project Ember was not a single experiment. It had started over 40 years ago, in the early days of human expansion into space, when Earth's governments realized that most of the habitable worlds within reach were not actually habitable by normal humans. The air was wrong. The gravity was wrong. The temperatures were wrong. Terraforming was expensive and slow. So a small group of scientists proposed a different solution. Instead of changing the worlds to fit humans, they would change the humans to fit the worlds. The first generation of Ember subjects had been prisoners. Volunteers in name only, promised reduced sentences in exchange for participation in what they were told was a fitness study. The gene edits were rough, and the results were mixed. Some subjects showed minor improvements in endurance and respiratory capacity. Others suffered organ failure. The program was shelved, classified, and buried. But it did not stay buried. Every few years, under a new name and a new director, the program resurfaced. Each time, the science was a little better. Each time, the subjects were a little less willing. By the time Teho's generation was selected, the program had learned to hide itself inside the colonial recruitment system. Colonists heading to high-risk worlds were quietly flagged and given modified medical packages before departure. They were never told. They were never asked. Hana found records of at least 12 colony groups that had been part of Ember across 3 decades. Most of the files ended the same way. Mission lost. No survivors recovered. Data archived. There were no follow-up reports because there was no one left to follow up on. Vorin 4 was Colony Group 9. She brought everything to Do-hyun. He sat at the console and read through the files without speaking. When he finished, he closed his eyes and pressed his hands flat against the desk, as if he needed to hold on to something solid. I knew it was bad, he said quietly. I did not know it was this organized. Hana told him there was more. She explained that the genes Ember had activated in Teho were not random selections. They were specific sequences that appeared in the ancient human genome, sequences connected to a branch of human evolution that the scientific community had dismissed as a dead end. But the Ember scientists had found those sequences and realized they were not dead. They were sleeping. And when they were forced awake, they did exactly what they had been designed to do tens of thousands of years ago. They made the body adapt, not over generations, not over centuries, within a single lifetime. The body would break itself down and rebuild to match whatever environment was trying to kill it. The cost was enormous. Pain, instability, death for many. But for those who survived the process, the result was something that had not existed on Earth in 40,000 years. While Hana and Do-hyun worked through the files, Taeho's condition began to shift. Veelith noticed it first. His second heartbeat, the one that had appeared faintly on the monitors 2 days earlier, was growing stronger. It had developed its own steady rhythm now, slightly out of sync with his primary heart, creating a strange double pulse that the monitoring systems did not know how to display properly. Norath had to write a custom subroutine just to track both beats without the machine flagging constant errors. But it was not just the heartbeat. Taeho's body temperature was rising slowly, not into a fever, but into a new baseline that was higher than any recorded human norm. His skin was changing at the microscopic level. Under Hana's scanner, the outer layer was growing denser, the cells packing tighter together. His blood oxygen levels were climbing even though the station's atmosphere mix was standard, not optimized for humans. Hana ran the numbers and sat back in her chair. "He is adapting," she said, "to the station." Veelith did not understand at first. Hana explained. Taeho's body was reading the environment around him, the alien atmosphere mix, the slightly different gravity, the unfamiliar pressure, and it was adjusting itself to match. Not because he needed to survive here. The station was perfectly safe, but his biology did not know that. It had been switched on, and it did not have an off button. It would keep adapting to whatever surrounded him, whether the environment was hostile or not. The process was hurting him. Taeho did not complain, but Veelith could see it in the way he held himself, the slight tension in his jaw, the careful way he moved, as if his body was something he had to negotiate with rather than control. She increased his pain medication. It helped for an hour. Then his system metabolized it, and the pain returned. On the third day, the Bureau's advance team sent a message confirming that the diplomatic envoy would arrive within 48 hours. The message included a list of procedures they intended to perform on the subject upon arrival. Genetic sampling, tissue extraction, full neurological mapping, stress response testing. Veelith read the list. She read it again. Then she stood up from her desk and walked to Taeho's room. She stood in the doorway for a moment, watching him. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, slowly flexing his hands open and closed, testing the grip strength that kept changing day by day. He looked up at her. "They are coming for me," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," Veelith said, "and they want to take me apart to see how I work." "That is what their message says." Taeho nodded slowly. He did not look afraid. He looked tired. The kind of tired that came not from lack of sleep, but from having been through this before, from knowing that the people who had made him were not finished with him, and that the people who had found him wanted the same thing for different reasons. Veelith straightened to her full height. Her mandibles clicked once, sharply, a sound her species made when they had reached a decision they would not reverse. "You are my patient," she said. "You are in my ward, and in my ward, anything that bleeds receives care. Not extraction, not testing. Care." She paused. "I will not give you to them." Taeho looked at her for a long time. The alien medic who stood 8 feet tall with 4 arms and compound eyes, defending a human she had known for 3 days. He had spent years among people who shared his species and his blood, and most of them had treated him as a tool. Now an alien who owed him nothing was willing to stand between him and the full weight of the Galactic Union. He did not thank her. He did not need to. He simply nodded, and something in his expression softened for the first time since he had arrived. In the monitoring room, Norath watched the double heartbeat on the screen and wondered, not for the first time, what kind of species could take this much damage and still keep going. He was beginning to think the answer was one that the galaxy had seriously underestimated. 2 ships arrived at Pale Reach on the same day. The first was the Union Diplomatic Envoy, a sleek silver vessel carrying 4 alien officials and a team of scientists who had been studying extinct species classifications for longer than humanity had known about the Union. The second was a smaller ship, unmarked, with Earth registration codes that Do-hyun recognized immediately as belonging to no public agency. The man who stepped off the second ship was named Sunwoo. He was tall and lean, somewhere in his 50s, with a face that gave away nothing. He wore a dark civilian suit and carried no visible weapons, but there was something about the way he moved, measured, deliberate, aware of every angle in every room, that told Do-hyun everything he needed to know. This was not a diplomat. This was a man who solved problems by making them disappear. Sunwoo introduced himself as a representative of Earth's Colonial Safety Bureau. He presented credentials that were clean and official. He smiled politely. He shook hands with Velith, who towered over him, and he did not flinch. He said he was here for a routine medical repatriation of a human citizen who had been recovered in distress. He said it the way a person reads a script. Every word in the right place, but no life behind any of them. Do-hyun pulled him aside in the corridor after the introductions. "I know what the Colonial Safety Bureau is," he said quietly, "and I know what you do." Sunwoo looked at him with calm, empty eyes. "Then you know I am being very polite about this," he said. "I could be less polite. I would prefer not to be." The Union envoy, meanwhile, had their own plans. The lead official, a tall crystalline being, whose name translated roughly as presiding factor, informed Velith that under Article 9 of the Extinct Species Preservation Protocol, the subject known as Taeho was now under Union scientific jurisdiction. He was a living representative of a species classified as extinct, and as such, he was protected, but also subject to mandatory study. They intended to transport him to a Union research facility for comprehensive analysis. So there it was, 2 powers standing in the corridors of a medical station at the edge of space, each claiming ownership of a man who belonged to neither of them. Earth wanted him back so they could bury what he represented. The Union wanted him preserved so they could understand what he was. And neither side had asked Taeho what he thought about any of it. Do-hyun told him. He went to Taeho's room and laid it all out. Earth's man was here. The Union's team was here. Both wanted to take him, and both had legal arguments that could tie up the station for months. Then he asked, "Can I speak to them?" The meeting was arranged in the station's main conference room, a circular space designed for multi-species diplomacy, with adjustable seating, atmosphere controls for different respiratory needs, and translation systems built into the walls. Sunwoo sat on one side, with his hands folded on the table. The presiding factor and the Union delegation sat on the other. Velith stood near the door with Norath behind her. Hana and Do-hyun stood near Taeho. 2 armed escorts from the Union envoy stood at the edges of the room. One of Sunwoo's people, a quiet woman who had come with him on the unmarked ship, stood against the far wall. Taeho walked in slowly. His body was still hurting. The adaptation process had not stopped, and every movement cost him something. But he stood straight. He did not sit down. The presiding factor spoke first. "You are a remarkable discovery," it said, its voice ringing like struck glass. "Your biology represents an evolutionary pathway we believed was permanently closed. The Union has a responsibility to study and preserve what you carry." Sunwoo spoke next. "You are a citizen of Earth. You were part of a colonial mission that experienced difficulties. We are here to bring you home and ensure you receive proper medical care." The word home sounded hollow in his mouth. Taeho looked at them both. He took a breath, and then he began to speak. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He spoke in Union Common, clearly and simply, and the room listened because there was something in his voice that made silence feel necessary. He told them about Voron 4, not the science, not the politics, the people. He told them about the 26 men and women who had boarded a transport with their bags and their hopes and their children's names saved in their messages home. He told them about the first week, when the air started burning their throats, and they realized the supply ships were not coming back. He told them about the changes, the pain that came in the night and did not leave, the feeling of bones thickening inside you, while you screamed into a pillow so you would not frighten the others. He told them about Jiseok, who had wanted a better life for his daughter, and who died with his own skeleton pressing against his heart. He told them about Minji, who adapted faster than anyone else, and then walked into the toxic wind one morning and never came back, because the person she had become was not the person she recognized anymore. He told them about the others who had lived and the others who had not, and he listed their names one by one, because nobody else ever would. Then he stopped and looked at both sides of the table. "You want to study me," he said to the Union delegation. "You want to silence me," he said to Sun Wu. "But I am not a specimen, and I am not a secret. I am what happens when you push a species to the edge, and it refuses to fall off. You do not get to own that. Nobody does." The room was very quiet. While the political standoff continued in the hours that followed, Hana completed her analysis of the second heartbeat. She had been running scans and cross-referencing data every few hours, tracking the organ as it strengthened inside Taeho's chest. She had assumed it was a second heart, an additional pump that his body had generated as part of the adaptation process. She was wrong. It was not a heart. It was something else entirely. She found the reference buried in the fossil record that she had been studying since the Arbiter's alert. Among the fragmentary remains attributed to Homo sapiens adaptica, there were traces of an organ that did not exist in modern humans. Researchers who had found it decades ago had not known what it was. They had labeled it an anomalous thoracic structure and moved on. Hana, with the advantage of a living specimen and modern scanning equipment, could see what they could not. It was a secondary circulatory structure, a dense knot of specialized tissue, nestled between the lungs and behind the primary heart. Its purpose was singular and extraordinary. In moments of extreme physical crisis, when the body was failing and the primary heart could not keep up, this organ would activate. It would flood the body with highly oxygenated blood, bypass damaged systems, and keep the brain and muscles functioning long past the point where any normal body would shut down. It was, in the simplest terms, an emergency survival engine. A biological last resort built into the human body 40,000 years ago, and then forgotten. And in Taeho, it was awake. It was functional. It was the reason he had survived things that should have killed him 10 times over. Hana brought the findings to the conference room. Both delegations read the data in silence. Even Sun Wu's composure cracked slightly, a small tightening around his eyes that lasted only a moment before he smoothed it away. But Sun Wu was not finished. When the room settled, he leaned back in his chair and played the one card nobody had expected. "He is not the only one," Sun Wu said. Every head in the room turned toward him. "Project Ember had 12 colony groups over 30 years, he continued. Most were lost, but not all. We have been tracking distress signals from a quarantine sector for the past 3 years. One signal matches a crew ID from Voron 4, Colony Group 9. He paused and looked directly at Taeho. "A woman, still alive, as far as we can tell." The room erupted. The Union officials began demanding details. Velith stepped forward, asking about medical status. Do-hyun was shouting something about classified operations and withholding rescue information. But Taeho heard none of it. He stood perfectly still in the center of the room, and for the first time since he had arrived at Pale Reach, His face showed something other than calm. His eyes widened. His breath caught. His hands, those scarred and rebuilt hands, began to tremble. He whispered a single name. Yuna. Sunwoo watched him with those empty eyes and said nothing. He had dropped the name like a match into dry grass, and now he would wait to see what burned. But he had made a mistake. He had assumed that the name would make Taeho easier to control, that giving him something to want would make him willing to cooperate. He did not understand what Taeho was. He did not understand that when you gave a man like this a reason to move, you did not get cooperation. You got a force that nothing in the galaxy could stop. Taeho looked up. The trembling stopped. His double heartbeats steadied on the monitor in the next room, both rhythms locking into perfect sync for the first time since his arrival. "Where?" he said. His voice was quiet and absolutely certain. "Where is she?" They left Pale Reach in the dark hours, when the station's corridor lights dimmed to simulate night, and the diplomatic delegations were locked in arguments that would take days to resolve. Velith had planned it carefully. She filed the shuttle's departure under emergency medical jurisdiction, a rarely used provision that allowed a chief medical officer to relocate a patient without external authorization if she judged that the patient's life depended on it. It was a legal gray area, wide enough to fly a shuttle through, and Velith flew through it without looking back. The crew was small. Velith piloted because she knew the station's departure protocols better than anyone. Dohan handled navigation, plotting a course to the quarantine sector, using coordinates that Hana had extracted from Sunwoo's own data files, before his people had time to lock them down. Hana sat beside Taeho, monitoring his condition, with portable equipment strapped to the seat between them. His body was still adapting, still changing, and the readings were getting stranger by the hour. Norath sat in the back of the shuttle, clutching a medical kit to his chest, and trying very hard not to think about the fact that they were defying both the Galactic Union and the Earth government simultaneously. The quarantine sector was 12 hours away at full speed. Do-hyun pushed the shuttle's engines to their limit and then slightly past it. Nobody told him to slow down. During the flight, Taeho spoke more than he had since his arrival. Not about himself, about Yuna. He told them how she had been the colony's communications officer on Voron 4, how she had spent the first month after the supply ships failed trying to repair the long-range transmitter with parts salvaged from their landing vehicle. He told them how she had kept account of the days on the wall of the shelter they built, scratching marks into the metal with a piece of broken tool. He told them how she had been the last one to change, the last one whose body began to break and rebuild, and how she had refused to scream even when the pain was at its worst, because she said screaming would mean the planet had won. Hana listened and said nothing. Velith listened from the pilot's seat, and felt something she rarely felt in her work, a sense that she was not just treating a body, but witnessing a story that mattered. They reached the quarantine sector in 11 hours and 40 minutes. What they found was a dead system, a single planet orbiting a fading red star, surrounded by the debris of what might once have been a moon. The planet itself was gray and brown, with clouds of chemical haze drifting across its surface like slow poison. The Union had flagged this system as uninhabitable and sealed it off years ago. Nobody was supposed to be here. Nobody could survive here. And yet, as the shuttle descended through the upper atmosphere, the sensors began to pick up life signs. They were faint, scattered across a narrow valley on the planet's northern hemisphere. Do-hyun adjusted the scanners, and the picture sharpened. 7 signatures, clustered around what appeared to be a collection of structures built from scrap metal and wreckage. There was no power signature, no communication signal, just 7 small points of warmth on a cold, dead world. The shuttle landed on a flat stretch of rocky ground, 200 meters from the settlement. The air outside was thick with toxins. The gravity was heavy, pulling at their bodies the moment the hatch opened. Velith's species could tolerate a range of atmospheres, but even she felt the chemical burn in her respiratory passages. Norath sealed his biosuit immediately. Dohyun and Hana activated their breathing masks and stepped out carefully. Taeho stepped out without a mask. Hana reached for his arm to stop him, but he was already walking. The toxic air hit his lungs, and he coughed once, hard. Then his breathing steadied. His chest expanded slightly wider than before. His second heartbeat, which had been running at a low rhythm during the flight, surged. Within 30 seconds, he was breathing the poisoned air as if it were a spring morning on Earth. Hana watched her portable scanner. His blood oxygen levels dipped, then climbed, then stabilized at a level that should not have been possible given what he was inhaling. His body was adapting in real time, right in front of her eyes. She had read the data. She had studied the theory, but seeing it happen in a living person was something else entirely. It was terrifying and beautiful at the same time. As they got closer, the structures took shape. Shelters made from the hull plates of a crashed ship. A water collection system built from salvaged piping and chemical filters. A small garden, if it could be called that, where dark, tough plants grew in soil that had been treated and retreated until it could support something resembling life. Everything was built with desperate ingenuity, the work of people who had been given nothing and had refused to accept that as an answer. Figures appeared at the edges of the settlement, 7 people, humans, but changed. Their skin was thicker, darker, with a rough texture that looked almost like natural armor. Their eyes had developed a reflective layer that caught the dim light and shone faintly, like animals adapted to permanent twilight. They were leaner than normal humans, every unnecessary ounce stripped away by the planet's demands. But they moved with a fluid strength that suggested the weight they had lost had been replaced by something harder. 3 years of surviving alone on different pieces of a galaxy that had never wanted them. Yuna reached out and touched the burn scars on Taeho's arm, tracing them with fingers that knew exactly how they got there. Taeho reached out and touched the new ridges on her shoulder, feeling the bone that had grown to protect her from a world that never stopped trying to kill her. They did not speak. They did not need to. Everything that mattered was written in the changes their bodies carried. Then Yuna pulled him close and held him, and Taeho held her back, and for the first time in years, his double heartbeats slowed to something that felt almost like peace. Velith and Norath stood at the edge of the settlement and watched. Norath's wide eyes moved from one modified human to the next, taking in the reflective eyes, the armored skin, the way they moved through the toxic air without masks or suits. These people had not just survived on this planet. They had become part of it. Their bodies had rewritten themselves to match an environment that should have been a death sentence. And they had done it without alien technology, without Union support, without anything except the raw, stubborn code buried in their own genes. Norath turned to Velith. His voice was very small. How do you classify a species that refuses to go extinct? Velith was silent for a long moment. She looked at the humans in their salvage shelters, at the garden growing in poisoned soil, at Taeho and Yuna standing together in air that should have dissolved their lungs. She had spent her career cataloging species, measuring them, recording their capabilities and limitations in neat files. She had always believed that science could contain any truth if you found the right category for it. She did not have a category for this. You do not classify them, she said finally. You respect them. Sunwoo's team arrived 6 hours later, tracking the shuttle's trail. But they were not alone. The Union envoy had followed as well, and aboard their ship was a complete copy of Hana's report, which she had transmitted to every Union medical and scientific archive before leaving Pale Reach. The report contained everything. Project Ember, The 12 colony groups, the names of the dead, the science, the cover-up, all of it. It was too late to bury. The Union officially offered asylum to the Ember survivors under humanitarian protection laws. Earth's government, facing exposure, was forced to acknowledge the program publicly. Sun Wu was recalled. Before he boarded his ship, he stood in front of Do-hyun and said, "You think this is the end of it. It is not. There are more programs, more projects. More of us than you know." Then he left, and his unmarked ship vanished into the dark between stars. On the last evening, before the shuttle returned to take them all somewhere safer, Taeho and Yuna stood on the surface of the planet that had tried to kill them, and looked up at the sky. The stars were dim through the chemical haze, but they were there. Yuna said, "Do you think they will ever understand what we are?" Taeho thought about this for a long time. He looked at his hands, the scars, the thickened knuckles, the skin that had been burned and broken, and rebuilt so many times that it was more history than flesh. He felt his double heartbeat in his chest, steady and sure, the old one and the new one, working together like they had always been meant to. "No," he said, "but that is fine. We were not made to be understood. We were made to survive, and we did." The dead planet shrank beneath them, gray and brown and silent. Inside the shuttle, Velith sat at her console and opened Taeho's medical file. She scrolled to the species classification field, where the Arbiter had flagged him as a member of an extinct subspecies. She highlighted the word extinct. She deleted it. In its place, she typed a single word and saved the file.